Good evening, everyone. Please welcome the 14th Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, and good evening, and welcome to the Library of Congress, to everyone here in the Jefferson Building and through our live stream. I am truly delighted to have all of you here to celebrate our United States Poet Laureate, Ada Limón. And we have some special guests in the audience that we want to thank, including Daniel Slager of Milkweed Editions, Carrie Olson of the National Park Service, and Matt Brogan of the Poetry Society of America for partnering with us on Ada's signature laureate project, You Are Here. And we also want to give a special thank you to Judith Maisel, who's watching us from her home in Chicago, for her ongoing support of Ada and her laureateship. And finally, thank you to Vaughn Fielder of the Field Office, who worked alongside our Literary Initiatives Office so closely during the last 3 years to help make Ada's tenure a success. We also have guests from the poetry community who are here to celebrate Ada. Fellow award-winning poet Kevin Young, Adrienne Matika, and newly minted, the new class of National Student Poets. Would you please stand up? We're so glad you're here because you are the future, so thank you. So, in serving as the U.S. Poet Laureate, Ada joined a special group including Elizabeth Bishop, Gwendolyn Brooks, Robert Frost, and Robert Penn Warren, and more recently, Billy Collins, Rita Dove, Joy Harjo, Robert Pinsky, and Tracy K. Smith. And you would agree that these are among our country's most accomplished and celebrated poets of the last century. And all came here to celebrate and promote poetry at the National Library, with the belief that poems can inspire us, challenge us, and connect us in a way no other art form can. And Ada has done so much to add to the contributions of our laureates. She has tirelessly traveled the country, reading her poems and promoting her Poetry in the Parks initiative at national parks. She's given keynote addresses and participated in interviews of all kinds. She's solicited and selected new poems for her laureate poetry anthology and has helped the library celebrate the acquisition of the Mary Oliver Papers. She has even written occasional poems in the role, like for the 5th Annual National Climate Assessment and the NASA Europa Clipper mission, making her the only laureate to send a poem into space. We literally sent poetry into the stars. And as some of us who get a little hokey said, and then she made us sparkle. But yes, that was quite a moment. And so her work has helped to extend and deepen the library's outreach and partnership, moving us closer to the vision of connecting all Americans. And our laureate, Ada, did it with grace, humility, and a tireless spirit. And so tonight, Ada will honor the tradition of the laureateship with a closing lecture, and hers is appropriately titled, Against Breaking, on the Public and Private Power of Poetry. And I know it will give us insight into her laureate work, but also what it means for her to start with a blank page and begin again. And poems have been said to be acts of faith. They offer our most intimate and searching language to anyone who is open to it. And each one requires its own form, its own discovery. In book after book, our laureate has shown us how rewarding this very private work can be for so many. I want to take this opportunity to personally thank Ada for all she has shared with us as the U.S. Poet Laureate, for what she will share on this stage, and for all she will continue to share as one of the greatest voices of this century. So please join me in welcoming U.S. Poet Laureate, Ada Limón.
What a beautiful crowd. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I am so moved by everyone who came out to the historic Coolidge Auditorium and has gathered for my last event here at the Library of Congress. No one knows where the future will take us, or even where the present will take us, but I'm so honored and proud to be in this room with all of you, gathered here for the sake of poetry, for the sake of language and meaning, and for what it means to make something that matters. Also, I love the word gathering, to gather oneself, to gather for worship, the gathering storm, to bring together, to gather strength, to gather courage. So thank you for gathering with me. I want to begin where I hope to begin all my days and all my hours, which is in gratitude. First, I want to thank the Library of Congress, and specifically the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden, for inviting me, yes, for inviting me a little under 3 years ago to serve in this role. I was so much younger then. Weren't we all? But you have been an inspiration and a mentor to me. You are a constant reminder of what it is to serve with dedication, with generosity, and with wisdom. May all leaders learn from you and your impeccable grace. And let me pause for a moment to read you the mission of the library: to engage, inspire, and inform Congress and the American people with a universal and enduring source of knowledge and creativity. Don't we need that? Yes. Secondly, I want to thank Rob Casper and Vaughn Fielder. Absolutely nothing would have happened during my tenure if it weren't for you two. For 3 years, our joke has been that Rob is the head and Vaughn is the soul. It's a joke, but it's true. Rob, your enthusiasm and stewardship is unmatched. And Vaughn, you are a guiding light that I am following constantly through the dark. So thank you. And before I begin the main portion of my talk, I want to add 2 things. And one is that I wore red on my first event because my husband said not to be subdued. And I wore green because all of my dear friends at the National Park Service said to wear green for the parks. And lastly, I want to thank libraries, all libraries and all librarians, the people who provide space for anyone with curiosity to learn and to explore. When I first went on a tour of the reading rooms with Vaughn, I kept being moved almost to tears, not just by the books or items in the collections, but how someone saved those items and thought to save them. Maybe in the middle of turmoil, or maybe in a hurry to save something that might someday prove useful, important. How archivists have carefully made boxes and cases specifically to preserve something precious, something rare. How librarians thoughtfully store and catalog and keep these items so that someday we are able to witness our past, all because someone cared enough. We stand in a building that holds our history, yes, but it holds our history because stewards, like librarians, were willing to hold our stories. So thank you to libraries and to everyone who works so hard to protect them. And now to the meat and bones. How are you guys doing? You're good? Okay. It is such a pleasure to be with you all. Welcome. This is a problem when a room full of friends. I just want to come out and hang out with you. But I'm going to do my job. Then we'll hang out afterwards. Against breaking on the public and private power of poetry. Truth be told, anytime I begin to write anything these days, my whole life flashes before my eyes. Do I want to break something? Or do I want to mend something? Or simply try to carve out a small place to breathe? Then, if I'm lucky, lines of poems I love start to move through me. They come to me as if through a necessary beckoning. On a flight back from Oklahoma, where all night I was up with hard rain and tornado warnings in a strangely bright hotel room, I began this piece for the third and what I'd hoped was the final time. I've tried to begin this talk a million different ways because I want and have always wanted only to make something true. And what is true these days? And how does one know it? This is when I put my faith in poetry. The line of poetry that comes to me first when I am beginning anything is from Yeats. I must lie down where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. And so yes, I think let me begin there, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. Then I think instead of the bottom of the well, shouldn't we begin in celebration? And Lucille Clifton comes to me. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? Or Robert Haas's poem, Faint Music, that begins with the lines, maybe it's time to write a poem about grace, when everything broken is broken and everything dead is dead. Yes, maybe it's time to write a poem about grace. Or do we begin in urgent chaos as the poet H.D., who began her poem Sheltered Garden from 1915? I have had enough. I gasped for breath. She was dramatic. You see, if we are lucky enough to live a life in poetry, we are never alone. We are never alone because anyone who has ever written is with us. The great book of us is being written together with everyone who has already written in every human language, and perhaps even in language we don't recognize as language, and everyone who will someday write. And sometimes we even place our own words there, tenderly, to remain for others to find. It can seem at times like a selfish act to write poetry, to devote a life to poetry, something only a solipsistic navel-gazer might do. I understand that impulse to roll your eyes at poets and poetry. I remember a friend in graduate school who used to come to readings and poke fun at the readers. "Oh," he'd say, pretending to clutch poems in his hand, "my blanket is so sensitive." We'd laugh and laugh because he wasn't wrong. Our blankets were sensitive, and we wanted to tell you about them. When so much is needed desperately and urgently in the world, how can one make an argument for poetry? Would it be an exaggeration to say that poetry saves lives? Maybe, maybe not. During my tenure as the Poet Laureate, I've come to realize that not only are people hungry for poetry, language, and connection, but that for so many people around the world, it serves as a much-needed lifeline already. It can be how we situate ourselves in the world, see ourselves reflected, or recognize our own suffering or our own joy. I've traveled now to almost every state in the Union, and it seems to me there is no place that poetry isn't alive and thriving. Sometimes it might only be a handful of people, a few outliers who share poetry at the library or the local dive bar on the edge of town. And sometimes it's a large and rowdy crowd. But poetry lives in all communities. When I first began this role, I thought my job was to bring poetry to the people, but that's not what happened. The offering was not central to my experience. Instead, it was the receiving. In the last 3 years, I had the great good fortune to listen to people tell me what poetry meant to them. One woman, her eyes blue and earnest, told me that her grandfather started memorizing poetry after his son died in war. He memorized poems so he could keep them in his mind while he stood in line or was waiting for anything. It kept his mind busy so it didn't go to the dark places. She said, leaning into me close at a reception, before he died, he gave each one of his grandchildren one of those poems he'd memorized, so we'd always have it as protection. Another woman who was born in Mexico stood in line at a bookstore and told me she had trouble holding on to both Spanish and English in her head, so she began to write original poems in Spanish and then translate them into English as a way of witnessing the world in 2 languages. Back and forth, she translates her own words so she could not just understand the language, but hear its music. Deep in the California desert, where it seemed a town came out of nowhere, out of tumbleweeds, weeds, and red rock outcroppings, a young student said, "I read this book every day when I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. When I was too sick to read it, my mom would read it to me." It goes on like this. Stories of people carrying a poem in their back pockets until it was so worn they couldn't read it anymore. Poems in hospitals or read at funerals, or someone beginning to write after many years of silence. Maybe poetry does save lives. I woke up one morning recently with a line by Stanley Kunitz in my mind. It was from his poem, The Testing Tree. In a murderous time, the heart breaks and lives by breaking. And to say it helped me get out of bed is no exaggeration. I rose and washed my face and looked into the mirror, and I was made braver by poetry. My heart is living by breaking, but my heart is living. And how many people quote that Mary Oliver line when they need it? I don't know exactly what prayer is. I do know how to pay attention. Or when I'm stuck in the middle of something difficult, some immovable obstacle in front of me, I conjure up Jean Valentine's poem, Door in the Mountain. I stare out a window or challenge in my mind, and I say her last line, "Door in the mountain, let me in." This is the secret power of poetry. little engines of sound urging us on, telling us we are not alone, because we can't be. We are connected to the readers and writers of poetry. Recently, at a reading in the Deep South, an older man came up to me in a neatly pressed white t-shirt, telling me he was embarrassed to say that he only wrote poetry in private, poems he'd never share. What a gift to be able to witness his confession and to tell him that many people tell me the same thing. I remember as he was telling me, I stared at the coffee cup someone had placed next to the book table, and it said, "Handle with care." Yes, handle all of us with care. We who are open to the world of poems. It gives me great joy to know people are writing secret poems. And if you are one of those people, I want you to keep going. Even if you never hand it to another person, there is a power in making private poems. Aren't we all walking around with some unsaid pain or some uncelebrated wonder? Aren't we all trying to find a place for our rage and despair? Is any poem ever failed because it goes unpublished or unshared? No, because didn't it make you pay attention? The act of writing? Didn't you even briefly feel as if you inhabited the world? Didn't it, for a moment, make you feel connected to language? Didn't you find a container for your heart? It is perhaps easier to explain what writing and reading a poem is and can do to a person than it is to explain what a poem actually is. What is a poem is the most dreaded question anyone can ask. Or it is not dreaded, but it's not easily answered. Ask a poet, and we immediately say things infuriating like, what is a soul? What does the color green mean? This is one of my favorite things about poetry. You can put all the poets of the world together in one room, and instead of one definition of a poem, you'd have many. This is another one of poetry's secret powers. It points out how utterly different we all are. It has no interest in sameness, flatness, homogeneity, and yet it is deeply human and can be at times universal. How is this possible? I once asked a neuroscientist, Heather Berlin, what was the thing that most surprised her about her research on the brain. She responded that anyone gets along at all. That anyone can be in a relationship with anyone else because our brains are so completely different. I've never forgotten that conversation, and it struck me as so revealing. If we are built so differently, why on earth are we ever trying to be the same? We aren't supposed to be the same. We aren't supposed to write the same. We aren't supposed to make the same art, or have the same beliefs, or love the same things, or love the same way, or worship the same way, or speak the same way. Well, that's what machines do. We are not machines. It's no surprise to me that with the exponentially rapid rise of artificial intelligence, we are re-examining our relationship to technology. And in my mind, we are putting far too much faith in technology. While I have deep concerns and anger around AI and its use of our poems, our words, our personal literature, not to mention its use of one of our most precious resources, water, as a poet, I wonder, why would we ever want AI to make art for us? Isn't that one singular joy we get for ourselves? But perhaps it's no surprise that people want to see if AI can write a poem. Why? In my opinion, it's because we want to know if AI has a soul. We want to see if what we created is indeed alive. And poetry is a way of testing that fact. But we aren't built with identical brains, And if we aren't, how do we come together? How do we, as Heather Berlin said, ever get along with anyone? This is where poetry comes in. If you have ever wondered what someone was thinking, or how they remembered a certain event, or how images unfolded in their minds for them, or what the inside of their thought patterns look like, then you've wondered what their poems would look like. You've wanted to open their secret selves like one might split a rock to find a geode inside, and that geode, that sparkling surprise, that's poetry. Listen, let me interrupt myself here and admit that there are days I do not want to read a poem. And there are certainly days that I do not want to write a poem. Why is that? Because there are days when I don't want to feel. Or rather, I only want to feel safe and soft things. Poetry does the work of opening us up to our feelings, and it's not surprising that it can often make people cry, even those of us who very much wish not to cry. It's my belief that this is why adults often think poetry is for children, not because they want it taught to children, but because they think children have more of an emotional range. I'd argue this is exactly why poetry needs to be more integrated into the lives of adults. We need to be reminded that we are, at the end of the day, deep feelers. And if we can admit our feelings, then we might be able to move in the world with more equanimity and courage. I'm not saying that's easy. Like I said, sometimes I too don't want to be reminded that I feel. In fact, explaining how we poets write a poem is so strange and utterly unexplainably idiosyncratic and full of restless emotions that it's confounding even to the most avid penner of poems. When someone asks how you write a poem, you cannot answer. And when people do answer, it makes sense, but it's not how you write a poem. And it's not how a poem gets made entirely, because a poem is always being made. It's being made right now. We are making it, you and I, reader and writer, listener and speaker, my past self, who is writing this, my present self, who is reading this, my future self, who is wondering what the hell I was even talking about in the first place. There are ways to teach poetry, for sure, but mostly we learn by reading and writing and writing and reading, and then going out into the terrifying world and feeling so much that those feelings threaten to collapse us onto the concrete, face down and forever ruined by human cruelty or even love. And then something happens. There's a moment where you think a little gravel on your cheek, this suffering might make for a good poem. Or this wonder might make for a good poem. It might even be simpler than that. You might think, is this concrete or cement? And what really is the difference? Or you might begin to think, oh, it's that the seas are different. A hard sea in one and a soft sea in the other. The hard sea in concrete, like cave or crash or catastrophic, compared to the soft sea in cement, like the sea itself, like supple or simmer. And of course, even at this point, you've entirely forgotten to interrogate the real material difference between concrete and cement. But you have determined that they are entirely different because they sound different. How do we say that this is how a poem is made? In the cement mixer of the soul. And your cement mixer is different than mine. And isn't that marvelous? When you read another person's poem, you are entering their music and their syntax. And because of the line breaks, commas and caesuras and stanzas, you're entering their breath. It's oddly intimate. We can inhabit each other's lives just by reading a poem aloud. And because it is intimate, how can you be alone if you have poetry? At a time when loneliness is being called an epidemic and division seems as basic to our daily lives as breathing, how could you not want an art form that allows for a type of connection? A connection that is on a different frequency than social media platforms, because it's on a human frequency, the algorithm of the body and the soul. And while this might not seem like a secret power of poetry, the fact that it is very difficult, if not impossible, to monetize poetry allows, it's true, poets know, allows for poetry to remain subversive. Poetry has the benefit of being outside economic systems. Is that a fancy way of saying that poetry doesn't make money? Yes. But it's more than that. It's meant to be free. It's meant to be given. It is meant to travel one poem at a time, like pollen from a tree floating through the air to make more trees. Poems travel that same way. And because of that, they remain sacred, unbothered by trappings of the usual oppressive systems. I think of Gregory Orr's poem that reads, "How lucky we are that you can't sell a poem, that it has no value. Might as well give it away. That poem you love, that saved your life, wasn't it given to you?" The secret power of poetry also fuels the public power of poetry. How it affects the individual helps move the collective. Perhaps in dire and dangerous times like these, all poetry can do is remind us where courage comes from. And if that's the case, maybe that's enough. Who doesn't need a little nudge these days to keep going or to be braver? Sometimes that bravery is private and individual, something to get you through this day to the next, or the next hour and the next. But sometimes poetry can also help gather strength collectively. I still remember sitting on the train after September 11th and reading the New Yorker issue that came out right after the towers fell. The black cover, nothing but the space where life once was. And I read Adam Zagorski's poem, "Try to Praise the Mutilated World." And I know this isn't true, but in my mind, everyone on the L train was reading it together, all at once, flipping to the page, the poem that ends. You've seen the refugees going nowhere. You've heard the executioners sing joyfully. You should praise the mutilated world. Remember the moments when we were together in a white room and the curtain fluttered. Return in thought to the concert where music flared. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn, and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world, and the gray feather, a thrush lost, and the gentle light that strays and vanishes and returns. For weeks afterwards, everyone handing out that poem and remembering it felt like the only thing that made sense. When all the rhetoric of war and nationalism and violence was blotting out the sun, this poem seemed to save me. I said it to myself like a mantra. Try to praise the mutilated world. Praise, praise, praise. It wasn't just the poem itself or the instructions it insisted upon, but the way it reminded us that language had power, and it could have a power for good. We need a secular, sacred language, something that is galvanizing without certainty, that gathers us without the seductive language of outrage, but under the connection that we all have to the human spirit, to each other, to the earth. Listen, friends, I am tired of violence. I am tired of hatred. I am tired of the anti-hero being made a hero. I am tired, I am tired, I am tired. But you know what isn't tired? Poetry. Poetry is just getting started. It's just coming out of the dust and rubble and beginning to learn the new, intricate song of this time. And we need it. Is it an intellectual endeavor? Sure. Is it a bodily excavation of memory and haunt? Yes. Is there outrage? Yes. Is there room for wonder? Yes. Langston Hughes wrote a poem that has been shared quite a bit recently, and I keep returning to it. Tired. I am so tired of waiting. Aren't you? For the world to become good and kind and beautiful. Let us take a knife and cut the world in two and see what worms are eating at the rind. The description of cutting the world in two feels so powerful right now. The poem is called Tired, but it's also a call to action. It's a poem that's getting ready for what's next. Poetry in the public realm has the power to form connection, foster courage, and refuel us for what's coming. If I can make an argument for poetry that exists in the darkened corners, in desk drawers, back pockets, might I add that there are times that poetry should be dragged back into the light. When I was putting together this piece, I asked a few non-poet friends what themes were coming up for them and what, if anything, was giving them hope. One of my friends, who was particularly despondent, was saying that he was finding very little hope these days. And then, after a moment of silence, where I wondered what devastating news he would send me next, he sent me a poem. That, to me, proves hope right there, or at least it proves that language itself can offer resilience. When I created my signature project as Poet Laureate, You Are Here, I wanted to make more public poems available because of my own connection to nature and the need for all of us to protect and preserve our planet. We worked with the National Park Service, the Poetry Society of America, to put poems throughout the different regions of the national parks. The Library of Congress team and the incredible park rangers and park service and Poetry Society staff members, all of us believed that poems might help us do one simple thing: pay closer attention. An accidental encounter with a poem can bring you back into the world, can remind you that you are in the world, part of it. I remember being on the subway in New York and looking up and seeing the poem by Robert Creeley called Return. That line that ends, "Enough for now, to be here, to know my door is one of these." I read it and watched everyone read it, and it did feel like enough for now, just to be here. Public poems and chance encounters have the power to shift us, but also to commemorate something that matters. Over my last year serving in this role, I've watched as people have gathered from all over the country around poems, unveiled at our beautiful, necessary national parks. They sat around the poetic installations and read them aloud together. It might not seem earth-shattering or monumental, but language in these public spaces matter. Arguably, the most public poem in this country is at the base of the Statue of Liberty, The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus, the poem that contains so many lines we know. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. There was a time when students were asked to memorize this poem. And while Emma Lazarus died at 38, her poem changed the meaning of the Statue of Liberty forever. It is nearly impossible to think of the statue without thinking of her sonnet that was engraved at its base in 1903. Not only can public poems serve as a way of connecting us, they can also be a reason to gather. During our You Are Here events at national parks, hundreds of people came out to see the poem unveiled and to sit at a picnic table to hear poems and connect to some of our most beloved natural spaces. The word I keep coming back to is belonging. It felt as if we were all coming together so that we could prove that we belonged to this earth, not that it belonged to us, but that we belonged to the planet itself. And for a brief moment, it felt like we belonged to each other as well. In the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, the sun was very hot. My dress had ripped completely up the back. And we rushed to the hotel to change into a backup suit I'd luckily packed last minute just in case. The suit was hot on stage in the summer Ohio heat. I was tired and feeling a little bruised by the world, but I had a moment where I thought, this is what we are supposed to be doing. Gathering for the sake of nature under this enormous tree, reading poetry, and doing this for each other, doing what Adam Zagajewski told us to do, praise, praise, praise. And this is when Ross Gay's poem, Sorrow Is Not My Name, comes back to me, that includes the passage, there are, on this planet alone, something like 2 million naturally occurring sweet things. Some with names so generous as to kick the steel from my knees. Agave, persimmon, stickball, the purple okra I bought for $2 at the market. Think of that. I've argued for most of my life that poetry is powerful in part because it exists in the questions and holds no answers. It's the opposite of a polemic or a prescription. Instead, it's an interrogation of the world and one's place within it. That said, perhaps even though it doesn't hold answers, perhaps it is an answer. When my maternal grandfather died, my grandmother, his wife of 76 years, right after the funeral, leaned to me and said, "Now, teach me poetry." And I think about that on a daily basis. Poetry seems to respond to things that are too large to be said, that the feeling is too big. Even as I write this in prose, I find myself resisting the sentences, the need for clarity of thought. It's not that I don't want to be clear. It's that I trust the mystery so much more. The images, the way in which each individual story returns to me all at once as I say these words. Audre Lorde once wrote, "If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive." Poetry can help us, prevent us from being eaten alive. Because if we write it, we are allowed to reframe the narrative, recenter the truth, and reimagine a different type of future. If we are readers of poetry, we can search for the poems that allow us to feel not just seen, but beheld. The right poem can make us recommit to the world. At this very moment, we need to gather strength and resilience and compassion in any way we can. Perhaps poetry for you is the secret place where you get to be as free and as safe as you can. Perhaps you can make that blank page a place where you can lay down everything you need to lay down. Maybe it's where you go to get stronger. Maybe it's where you go to get softer. But know there is a place you can go on the page where no one controls you but you. And that right there is a mighty power. As I was scrolling through social media, looking for anything that could give me a little sense of connection, I ran across a social media influencer telling people they had permission to live a big life. I'd like to add that a small life needs to be recognized here too. We don't just change overnight. Courage doesn't come from a depleted place. We plant seeds. We take care of our families, of each other. We bring food to a neighbor or clean out litter from a creek bed. We listen to our favorite song while driving. We read a poem. A big life requires a small life. They do not exist without each other. While poetry can be unifying and energizing for crowds and in the public arena, it is also the natural caretaker of the small life. We cannot rise to our full power if we are not paying attention to what we give our attention to. Poetry can be our lens to discovering how we find our own worth and our own gift we can offer. These days, I think of this Emily Dickinson's poem almost daily. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. Sometimes all poetry is offering me is possibility. When the world says things are impossible, poetry says, is that true? What if the new story starts here? What if the center is not where you think it is? What if those that steward and protect and are gathering now as we speak will rise to what is next and a whole new epic beginning will begin? No one knows how this ends. And just like when I begin things and poetry comes, when I end things, poetry comes. The lines from Alberto Rios' poem, A House Called Tomorrow, come to me now. Look back only for as long as you must, then go forward into the history you will make. Be good, then better. Write books, cure disease, make us proud, make yourself proud, and those who came before you, when you hear thunder, hear it as their applause. If everything we know about the world is true, then we, in fact, will all die someday. This is the fact that most poets are intimately aware of. Why does poetry matter, you ask? Poets respond, because we're all going to die. It's true. What do we do with that? We pay close attention to the world because paying attention is a way of saying thank you, a way of loving. Recently, I received a thank you package from a friend. I wrote a poem for the ancient woods he lives close to that are in grave danger of logging. As a thank you, he sent me a package full of aromatic branches and detritus from the forest floor, pine needles and cedars. The package smelled like the entirety of the earth itself. I opened it, and there was a little note that said, I am so grateful. I thought, this is a poem right here, a handful of earth we are sending to someone else with a thank you bound at its core. I want to do that for you, reader, listener. I want to send you a box of the earth, and I want you to hear my thank you. It has been one of the greatest honors of my life to serve as the 24th Poet Laureate of the United States, and no one knows what's going to happen next. We may be gathered in the largest library in the world, but it is not just a testament to books or items in the collections, but to the people who knew what was worth saving. Right now, we must pay attention to what needs saving. I want to leave you with this. When you want to create a safe space to stand in, to breathe in, to gather courage, to find your hope again, to find your strength again, you can stand in poetry. It's my belief that poetry is something we are all making together, and it belongs to everyone around this planet. And it does not believe in nations, or borders, or cruelty, or power for power's sake, or war, or violence, or causing harm. Poetry wants us to be our free and best selves, open to wonder and open to making a life that matters, both big and small. As June Jordan once wrote so brilliantly, we are the ones we have been waiting for. And we are. Listen, I'm not saying you have to love every poem I love, or love any poem I write. It could be that I'm the wrong person to convince anyone of anything. I say hello to crows as if they will say hello back. And sometimes they do. I shout out at trains to see if I could match their howling, and point at the moon because, it's the moon. But let me say that if you feel the need to trust language again, to remember that language could have power, could hold multiple truths, then you need poetry. If you need to be reminded of what makes us human, tender, brave, flawed, and worthy of love, then you need poetry. But I also understand that if I cannot explain to you what poetry is, how can I convince you to love it or tell you that it matters? There's also some part of me that wants to say, if you can't understand why poetry matters, that's okay. If you don't love poetry, that's okay. I release you. Be well. Be free. Be exquisitely removed from this conversation. And yet, I want everyone to know this kind of magic, the sort of trembling a good poem can offer, the way writing poetry can excavate pieces of your soul you did not know existed. But not everyone has to feel this way. Not everyone has to love what I love. In fact, I'll say this: you do not have to love poetry, but you have to love something. Even simpler, you have to love. Thank you.
Thanks, and I'll be quick. It was wonderful. I will say I led many of you to the last remaining seats here in the Coolidge Auditorium, and I actually gave away my own seat and sat on the stairs and looked at all of you, and I took one of those pano pictures of an amazing, full, and vibrant Coolidge Auditorium for posterity. I'm Rob Casper, head of poetry and literature at the library, and I want to tell you a few things. First, we have a book signing next door in the Woodall Pavilion, right over there. Ada will only sign her name and to her own books, and there won't be any personalization. and she can only sign 2 books at most for signature. This is just so that we can make sure we get everyone through the line. Also, I want to tell you that we'll be sending you a survey, those of you here in the audience. We hope you fill it out and tell us what you think of tonight's event. Finally, I want to tell you that we'll have the 2nd annual Mary Oliver Memorial Reading on Thursday, May 29th, upstairs in LJ 119. We hope you come to that and check out events here at Live at the Library and enjoy this amazing space. Thank you and good night.